Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm glad you're here. Glad to see you. No, not even hear you, but I'm glad you're here and I can feel you. I know you're out there. I don't know if that's comforting or creepy. Oh, well. Matthew 16. That's what we're going to get into today. So, Jesus was pestered a lot by the Pharisees. Have you guys noticed that? He was really pestered a lot by these guys who, knew everything, right? They were the smart guys in the church. They were the ones who were leading the discussions and teaching the people at the synagogue, right? So they just really were having a hard time with Jesus. And, rightfully so, right? They didn't quite know what to make of him. They, some of them were really, turned out to be believers of his and really were moved by the miracles that he was doing. But others, as a whole, they were like, give us signs. You got to give us a sign. And Jesus is like, he basically says no. No, I mean, because honestly, what were all the things he'd already done were signs, right? Wasn't that enough proof of who he was? And they weren't believing that either. And Jesus is like, what's the point of me even doing it? Because you're just gonna just not acknowledge it or say that wasn't good enough, right? They weren't happy with the kinds of signs he was already doing, correct? So, and he tells us this. He has another interaction with the Pharisees, and then the very next bit of Matthew 16 is he looks at his disciples and he's like, do not be, what does he say? What's the words? He says, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And the disciples were like, what? They don't make good bread? And they were like, he's saying this because we forgot to pack our snack. We didn't bring any bread with us. And so he heard him. He's like, is that really, you guys really think that that's what I'm talking about? We have literally just fed. And he refers back to, he said, we've just fed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And we just fed 4,000 with 7 loaves. Why? Clearly bread and us eating is not what is bothering me about this. Which that whole thing is, and maybe I just maybe I just add a little bit too much of myself in there. Because I could just see Jesus going, guys, literally, I'm not worried about bread. Please. No, my point is that, so the whole point of him saying that, the yeast, yeast is what's added to bread dough to make it rise. And the thing is, it just takes just a little bit of yeast. I mean, like, if you are, some of you may know that I've fancy myself a little amateur baker now. Not really, but I do take a lot of baking classes. And I've been told that I have to call myself a baker. But if you're measuring out, and that's the thing, you have to measure out everything when you bake, right? If you're not measuring it out and being precise, that's probably why you're not having a lot of success, which tends to be my problem because I'm more like a just throw it in kind of gal. With baking, you have to be precise. And so the measurement for yeast for something I was making was like 0.4 or 2.4. And my scale does not get that specific. I can either have 2 or 3. I can't get 2.5. So you just kind of have to guess a little bit, but my point is that's 2.5 grams of yeast is teeny tiny. It's just a little bit of yeast. There is not much involved in that. And that little tiny amount will work its way through the entire loaf of bread or whatever it is you're making, and it will eat the sugar that's in there and grow and grow and grow and grow, and that's what creates the rise of your bread. And so Jesus's point here is just a little bit of this teaching, just a little bit of this yeast they're using really can spread and really can cause, a big effect, right? So that there's there's that picture of it working its way in, and then really, so if they're being a distraction to Jesus, just a pain in the tail with all their questioning, and they're just following him around saying, "Oh, wait." And they really kind of were like, "You're blasphemous anyway. You've got evil spirits doing these things." I mean, they had just come against him with every kind of explanation they could come up with. And Jesus is like, "Do you see this? That's, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much of them questioning and of them casting doubt and of them calling me, saying that I'm blasphemous, and them calling me, a worker of Satan, which makes no sense." He's like, it doesn't take much for that to sow some doubt in there. And so not only are they distracting, but they're also have that the disciples needed to be aware that they could really be leading people astray. Right. And that is so important, I think, especially today. And not to say that we're worse off than any other generation, because I believe that everything is cyclical. Like there's nothing new under the sun. Whatever we've come up with now that we're doing that's awful, it's been done before. Okay. And it says, because Jesus says to them, because he says it in 16:4, "A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah," which is, that's Jonah went to Nineveh anyway. But how to interpret the appearance of the, okay, anyway. So that's what Jesus is saying. He's like, this generation, you're looking for something, but you're only going to be, is it going to do any good? Right. And I mean, gosh, isn't that who we are? And so they're traveling, and it's interesting that they come to, in the area of Caesarea-Philippi. And remember Herod Antipas that I talked about a couple weeks ago. So Philip was his brother, right? His half brother. Philip was his half brother, and this was his area that he was part of. This was in the territory that he ruled, and he had renamed this city Caesarea-Philippi after Caesar and after himself, because, he's so humble. And he was a great guy, right? Everybody liked him. He was a pretty good ruler, but he was very not Jewish. Very pagan. He had spent a lot of time in Rome, probably more even so than Herod Antipas had. And so he allowed all these pagan temples to stay where they were, and it just really grew. And in this area, Caesarea-Philippi was known for its temple to the god Pan, and Pan was half man, half goat, and often played the flute. I'm sure you've seen depictions of him. And I have actually been to this temple area. It's fascinating, and it is beautiful because it's at the base of Mount Hermon, so it's up there by the border of Syria and Israel. And at one point, Syria had controlled this. But it also, so off Mount Hermon is where the Jordan River starts. And so this spring that at the base of Mount Hermon in Caesarea-Philippi, in that area, is where the temple of Pan was. And so you can see this water pouring off the mountain and coming into, and they made beautiful, the water came through this cave, and it's just a really lovely area. But carved into the mountain are these little niche, whatever it is. And it's like there would have been statues and offerings made. So they were just all over the mountain. And I'm going to include a picture on the website. You'll be able to find a picture of this under Bible Talk in the notes area. So you'll be able to see a picture of what this looked like. But it's really beautiful. But I think that, and what I learned while I was there from my pastor and our Dr. Shane Green, who you all have met on Let's Talk, and our tour guide, George, was that perhaps the reason that Jesus asked the next question of his disciples is because they were in this area, and there were a lot of pagan gods around. And so Jesus may have been influenced by, the surroundings to say, "Hey, guys, who do people say that I am?" And the disciples are like, well, some say, you're John the Baptist or you're Elijah or you're Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. That's what, most people think you are. And so Jesus then turns and looks at them and he says, but who do you say that I am? And Peter, of course, teacher's pet, he wants to be the best one, says, well, you are the Son of God. You are the Son of the living God. You are the Christ. You are the Messiah, because Christ is interpreted Messiah. So you are the one. And I love what Jesus says to him here, because he says, and because this is, just for this was a moment for Peter, if not the moment for Peter here, because he says, Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." So he says to Peter, you're right, and you're blessed, and you got this knowledge from my Father. This has been revealed to you. It has been revealed to you that that is exactly who I am. And he gives this beautiful, says, and Peter, this is my church is going, because Peter means the rock. And so he says, and my church is going to be built on you. And that's exactly what happens in Acts. Peter becomes the leader of the group. And we see that Peter is the one going out and going on these missionary journeys and telling and preaching. And really his sphere of influence was the Jews. He stayed with the Jews. Paul, we see later, goes out into the Gentiles. But this is what Peter becomes. And what a moment for Peter. For him to be, of course, the first one to say, well, you are. But where did he get that? It had been revealed to him. So the next thing that happens is Jesus calls him Satan. So it's like, so Peter had a rooftop moment, and then he had a down in the dumps moment, right? Because as Jesus, as they begin to understand who he is, and as Peter testifies who he is, that's what we as Baptists would say. That's when he got saved. That's when Peter got saved. That was his public profession of faith. I don't know if he got baptized. That's neither here nor there. So after he says this, and so don't you know that must have started like a domino effect, like everyone else kind of started. Oh, wait a minute. This is when the revelation was coming to them. And so as they were gaining more knowledge, right, Jesus starts to say, hey, here's what's going to happen. He starts talking about that he's going to suffer and that he's going to die. And he says, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day to be raised to life. And can you imagine sitting there and hearing those words? I can imagine that many of us would have the same response as Peter, because Peter says, no, Lord, no. That will never happen to you. Like, we're not going to allow it. I will not allow that to happen. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. And I can just imagine Peter being, oh, why'd you call me Satan? It seems a little harsh, doesn't it? But here's the thing. That stumbling block, and Peter's intentions were good, right? He wasn't saying anything awful. He wasn't contradicting Jesus. He wasn't trying to stand in the way. He was not wanting Jesus to be injured or killed. He didn't want that to happen because he loved him and wanted him to stay with him forever, right? There's nothing wrong with that. His intentions were good, but his intentions went directly against what God's intentions were. And Jesus, went through that temptation as we saw in the desert in the beginning of Matthew. Was that chapter 3, chapter 4? He already been there, done that, where he'd been tempted, where, Satan did say, command, these angels to come get you, or jump off this rock and these angels will swoop down and save you. Turn this rock into bread. You're starving, aren't you? It's been 40 days. I mean, aren't you hungry? Turn that rock into bread. Jesus has already dealt with these kinds of things, and this was another temptation. Look, it just proves it's another temptation of Jesus to say, yes, I'm using my divine power, and I will not go through this. But that would miss the point of everything. Because the point of Jesus coming is to suffer all the things and to die on the cross so that he can defeat death and be raised again. For who? For you, for me, for humanity. That's why Jesus came. That was the whole point. It wasn't just a side thing. It wasn't just something that, let's try this and see if it works. No, that was the whole point of Jesus coming to the earth and putting on flesh, of denying his divine and kind of bottling up his power so he could walk on earth and be a human. He had to do it that way. For him to say, get behind me, Satan, don't tempt me with that. Peter, don't speak that into existence. I have to do this. And then he gives a very famous, you'll know this. You'll recognize this passage because Jesus says to his disciples, starting in verse 24, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you the truth. Some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. This is where he says, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And they knew what that picture meant. They knew that would be, crucifixion was, real popular way for the Romans to deal with criminals. They knew what, a public crucifixion looked like, and they knew that you would have to, and as we know this happens, that you have to carry your cross through the streets and to the place. That's just how it went. And that cross was heavy. And Jesus is saying this requires a commitment. It's going to be tough. But you got to deny everything and fight within you, because that you have to deny that. Peter had to deny that part that said, no, I will not let this happen. I'm not going to let this happen. He had to deny that part of himself so that he could allow God to work. I mean, that's hard. Because those intentions are good. To save Jesus would be good, right? Not for humanity in general, no. But for his friends, to keep him a little longer, for them to grow old together, yeah, those are good things, right? So the question is, number one, two questions. Just like Jesus asked the disciples, who do you think I am? And question two is, are your good intentions getting in the way of God's intentions? What could you be screwing up? What might you need to sit down, put aside. Just be quiet. Quit meddling. And let God do his work. Because remember, Jesus loves you.